What drives you? What drives me is unleashing my passion and purpose, helping you elevate your skill to empower people and affect change in multiple ways through one brief interaction. You have within you the capability to empower people and affect change in one brief interaction. Let me share with you an experience that happened many years ago. It's important you know whenever you empower someone else, the experience is also empowering to you. Sometimes it's hard to figure out who is more empowered. I believe in this case, even though I empowered Mark, I believe the experience was much more empowering for me because he ignited within me my passion and my purpose. I had taken a course. It was an 8-day course where I learned how to effect change in people in one brief conversation. I was quite excited about what I learned, and I couldn't wait to try out what I learned in my work as a county director within the Indiana's welfare system. It was the first 3 working days of the month, and there was a commotion in the lobby. Somebody was angry and raised their voice, and it was quite unsettling to hear. I was the county director then, and I stepped in to intervene. Typically, when the county director stepped in to intervene, people would immediately calm down because I was an authority figure. When I stepped in to intervene, the person didn't calm down. His name was Mark, and what he said to me instead of calming down was either I was going to give him his food stamps or I'm going to beat the shit out of you. He said that with very forcefully. And let me share with you a little bit about what I knew about Mark at the time so you could see why what he said was quite unsettling to me. I knew that Mark had once spent time in prison for a felony conviction. I knew that he had anger and violence issues. I knew that he was a drug and alcoholic and he had addictions issues. And I knew that he was very violent. I knew whenever there was a domestic disturbance that involved Mark, they always sent 2 squad cars with 4 officers in it because they knew if Mark was involved in a domestic disturbance, there was a good indication that a officer would be injured. Mark had once attacked a detective from behind with a knife. I also knew that Mark used to brag about receiving food stamps. He would go around the community saying, "Why should I work when I can get food stamps?" I used to think that 5% of the people gave a bad rap upon the other 95%. And of all the people in Montgomery County, Indiana at that time, Mark was number one on my list for the most despicable human beings because he bragged. I got more complaints about him bragging why should he work when he get food stamps than all of the other complaints I received about all of the other clients at that time. I was able to get Mark to come into my office, but he didn't calm down. I closed both doors to my office to keep the rest of the public that was filled in the lobby away from Mark and to keep the staff safe too. But you could argue that I put myself in a very dangerous position. Much of the conversation for 90 minutes went something like this. If he beats the tar out of me, I'm going to have him arrested. If I am arrested, I'm going to make bail and come back and beat the tar out of you again. That did not sound like a win-win situation. It sounded like a lose-lose to me. And I remember at the time that my armpits were literally pouring down sweat. I put on a sport coat before I went to greet him. I had a tie on then at the time too. And my armpits were just literally pouring down sweat because I was afraid of Mark. He was built like Popeye. He was very capable of ripping me apart. And I knew that based upon his previous record, that he was quite capable of following through on his threat. I managed to utilize every ounce of my influence skills that day and get myself out of that situation without getting the tar knocked out of me. And he didn't get his benefits that day because that would have been theft. He came back in a few days and went through an interview process to be able to be reestablished as eligible to receive food stamps. And then he picked up his benefits a few days later. 30 days after that, he came back in the office to get his food stamps again. I happened to bump into him in the lobby, And he was quite warm and friendly with me, and I was quite warm and friendly with him. Somehow, in the process of that intense conversation, we had bonded with one another. I then asked him that day, I thought about the training I'd had about how you could affect change in anybody in one brief interaction. And I thought, well, maybe, what if Mark really wanted to work? I asked him, I said, what about me helping you get a job? And what Mark told me then, he said he would not do janitorial work because that was beneath him. Then he said he would not work in a factory because that was too hot and sweaty. Here's a guy with a felony conviction on his record that won't do janitorial work and won't work in a factory. I thought to myself, he's too picky. And so I didn't do anything to help him get a job. That day, what he said was he thought it'd be cool to drive around town in a bread truck, delivering bread. And he asked me to help him do that. 30 days later, he came back in the office to pick up his benefits. I happened to be in the lobby and I bumped into him again. We once again small talked and were warm and friendly with each other. This time he popped the question with me. He said, how are you doing with my job search? He asked me how he was doing with his job search. I told him I hadn't done anything. He said, how come? I said, you're too picky. He said, what do you mean I'm too picky? I said, you won't work in a factory. Without any hesitation whatsoever, he looked me right in the eyes and he said, I'll work at a factory. I didn't get him a job. I called an HR manager that I knew at a local factory. That HR manager happened to have a foreman that was hiring, and that foreman interviewed Mark. Mark interviewed so well. He wanted that job so much that the foreman, in spite of all the reasons he could have and should have said no, offered Mark a job, and he took it. Then I started getting weekly phone calls from that HR manager. Mark is knocking himself out to outperform everybody on the line. Mark is shining and making his supervisor proud of him. After 30 days, I bumped into Mark and I said, Mark, I want to take you to lunch as my way of acknowledging you for the change you made in your life. That's when I saw for the first time a very different side of Mark. He said that he was totally uncomfortable going to a restaurant. He was uncomfortable because he thought people were looking at him. He was paranoid. He went to the restaurant with me anyway, and he was sitting at the table and he was like this. He would dart his head back and forth looking to see who was looking at him. He had no idea at the time, but by darting his head back and forth like that, he was drawing people's attention to him. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy with a negative effect. And I couldn't see it then, but I can see it now. He couldn't see it either, though. He just thought people were looking at him. Then he kept that job for 1 year, and then he lost it. I learned from the HR manager that I knew that he lost the job. Something interesting happened, though. He never came back in the office again to apply for food stamps. 10 years went by, and I didn't see Mark a single time for 10 years. Then I got a new job, and I was working in a new community. And I was driving 2 hours to work each day for a brief period of time while I had a senior in high school. I stopped for a cup of coffee at a gas station to keep myself awake on the road, and I bumped into Mark for the first time in 10 years. He was dressed like a regular workaday Joe when I asked him what he was doing. He was on his way to work at a local factory. Mark had changed his life. And for me, he changed me. He got me to realize that if Mark could change, anyone can change. You and I have the ability to effect change in people in one brief interaction. With Mark, it took me a couple of interactions, but nonetheless, each one was brief. Here is a call to action that I invite you to accept. I invite you to invest 10 minutes a day to read a book. And the book I invite you to read is called The Art of Possibility by Benjamin and Rosamund Stone Zander. It's a stimulating book that will get you thinking about what is possible when it comes to you and I affecting change in the lives of people around us. And imagine for a moment if you're a leader within a company and you can do this with your team members. Can you see how this might be valuable for your company and your team members? My name is Keith Wheatman. I'm the principal and founder of Level 3 by Design. My passion is my company's mission, helping leaders elevate their skill to empower people and affect change in multiple ways through one brief interaction. Thanks so much. I'll be back soon with another tip to help you elevate your skill to empower people.